Made with Spoken. When David Met Lillian and Allison, Part 2, Allison, by Franetta McMillian. I first met Allison Flowers at her sister Etta's 21st birthday party. Lillian and I tried to do the long-distance thing for a couple of years, but after he proposed, I quit my job and moved to the Crescent since there was no way on earth Lillian was going to leave his home region, even for me. Etta Flowers' birthday party was the first Crescent Society event I attended, and I was bored to tears. It reminded me of those stiffly choreographed soirees Uncle Prentice made me attend as a kid. It might have helped if Lillian had been with me, but he was busy with some soil rehab project in the Florida Badlands and wasn't due back for another couple of weeks. Actually, Lillian requested that I look after Allison, since she was going through a rough patch and needed someone like an older brother in her life. He thought we had a lot in common. We were both orphans, although Allison at least had a father until she was almost 18, while I'd lost both my parents to a shuttle crash just before I was 9. We were both brilliant, although Allison was an artist and I was a scientist, and we both had what Lillian thought was a healthy disdain for our Baron's birthright. Finally, Lillian said, "She's the only person on this earth who is as stunning as you. She is a force of nature." Both Flowers sisters were attractive, but Etta had the cool perfection of a marble statue, while Allison was, well, something else. Imagine ball lightning trapped in the body of a goddess. Like Lillian said, a force of nature. I found Allison seated at a table by herself looking demurely bored. She was dressed in a figure-hugging midnight blue evening gown with a high cream collar and modest short sleeves. It was a nice-looking dress, but it seemed a little too conservative for her. Even Etta's dress showed more skin. I sat down next to her and introduced myself. "David Grove," she said, smiling. "So you're Uncle Lily's fiancé." "I sure hope you don't call him Uncle Lily to his face," I said. "His sister Raylene calls him Lily, and it drives him crazy." "Oh, no," Allison assured me, winking. "I'm very respectful. It's either Uncle or Dr. Ruby." She placed a tastefully manicured hand on mine. "Stand up, Dr. Grove. Let's have a good look at you." For some reason, I did as I was told. It was the first instance of Allison compelling me to do something before I was fully conscious of what I was doing or why I was doing it. Her eyes scanned the entire length of my body. I felt horribly self-conscious. "Man," Allison finally proclaimed, "you are hot. I am so jealous." I laughed nervously. "Ms. Flowers, are you actually hitting on me?" "No," she said. "I was just stating a fact. Although if you're game..." I sat back down. "I don't think so." "Why, are you exclusive?" "Exclusive? Do you mean am I exclusively gay or what?" "No, I mean, are you and Uncle Lillian going to have an open marriage?" I crossed my arms and glared at her. "That's none of your beeswax, young lady." She gave one of my arms a gentle squeeze and smiled warmly. "Okay, don't go all parental on me. I was just teasing." "Huh." Her so-called teasing seemed fairly extreme for someone she'd just met. Fortunately, Lillian also warned me Allison liked to shock people for the hell of it. Still, just to be safe, I decided to steer our conversation to safer ground. "Nice party," I said. She laughed at my feeble attempt at small talk. "Certainly you can't mean that. Because for a while there you were looking as bored as I felt." "You've been watching me?" "Yeah, Etta said she invited you, so I was checking out the new guy." "Well, this just reminds me of all those parties my uncle made me go to when I was a kid." "Your uncle's H. Prentice Grove, right? I heard he used to throw some wild ones." Now it was my turn to laugh. "Uncle never invited me to those parties, although when my cousin Jerry came of age, Uncle invited him to one. No, I was talking about those awful pre-programmed dinner party things, with arcane seating charts and way too much silverware, the kind of party where people come to be seen." Allison looked thoughtful. "Yeah, kind of like this one. Some of this is going to end up on the society web." She took a sip of ice water, and I noticed she had a tattoo that encircled her wrist. I tried to read what it said, but the script was so stylized as to prove unreadable. "What's your tattoo say?" I asked. "There is a world elsewhere," she replied. "It's Shakespeare." "What's it mean?" "Well, in the context of the Crescent," Allison explained, "it's there to always remind me that there's a world outside of the dome. It also refers to the world I can see in my head, the one I'm trying to build for real, the world that is just and fair, where the divide between outside and the dome doesn't exist." She looked very earnest when she said that, as well as a little sad. I sensed there was more to that story. "It was one of the tats I got right after my father died," she added. "You mean you have more than one?" She winked at me again and grinned. "Hell yeah," she purred. I'm a regular Yakuza. I laughed despite myself. Then she said, "Hey, how'd you like to ditch this affair and go to a real party?" I was all for vacating the premises, but a bit wary of where she might take me. "Where do you suggest?" "It's Zydeco night at Christie's." Christie's. I had heard of the place. It was somewhere on the border of the 6th and 7th zones. I checked my watch. It was a few minutes before midnight. Not exactly the best time to be traipsing around the deep outside. "What's the matter, Dr. Grove?" she asked mockingly. "Are you scared of the big bad outside?" Of course I was, as I thought anyone in their right mind would be. But I swallowed my fear and tried to play it cool. "No, I'm not." She stood up and smoothed her dress. "Well then, let's book this yawn fest and gear up. The ferry leaves in a little less than an hour." "You would leave your own sister's birthday party?" I asked, primarily to buy some time. Allison saw through my bullshit in a heartbeat. She yanked my arm and nearly pulled me out of my chair and onto the floor. "I sang happy birthday to her this morning. Come on, Frady Cat, let's go." We just made the ferry, which surprisingly, well, at least to me, was crowded. Allison dragged me down a couple flights of narrow, winding stairs to the enclosed decks where there were air filters. We squeezed onto a bench and removed our helmets. I looked around and tried not to stare. Never had I seen so many poor and tired-looking people in my life. Outsiders in Upper Midwest always looked hardy, since they had to be strong enough to survive the long and brutal winters. Even the outsiders of Northwest Woods looked better than those I saw on the ferry that night in the Crescent. Almost every has-suit had multiple patches, which was a frightening detail to contemplate when you considered that most of the Crescent outside was rated D3 or worse. Everyone on that ferry was slowly dying, slowly being poisoned by the simple act of breathing, whether they knew it or not. Although I gather most of them did know, judging from the hopeless and hollow look in their eyes. So this was what Lillian was trying to save. No wonder he worked all the time. Allison leaned over and whispered, "Dr. Grove, how long have you been in the Crescent?" "A little over 3 months. Why?" "You've never ridden the public ferry?" I shook my head, to which Allison responded by kicking me in the shin. "Fool," she hissed. "Uncle L is richer than God, and he always takes the ferry." I massaged my leg and made a mental note to forgo the tunnels and take the ferry from then on. We had a good time at Christie's. We both had a bit too much to drink and smoke, but while I was merely pleasantly intoxicated, Allison was having trouble standing up. We had to take a shuttle from Christie's to the ferry port, and then another shuttle from the Dome ferry port to Allison's apartment. It was almost 9 Sunday morning by the time we made it to Allison's front door. Those who were religiously inclined were spilling onto the sidewalks in their Sunday finery on their way to Mass, while Allison and I were stumbling around in full gear, reeking of alcohol and herb, returning from a night of debauchery. It was kind of funny in a way. Some big brother I turned out to be. It took us forever to get into her apartment because Allison couldn't quite remember her key code, but we eventually got in and she made a beeline to her bedroom, threw herself on the bed, and passed out. I shook her back to consciousness and she opened her eyes and stared at me like she was having a hard time remembering who I was. She really did have beautiful eyes, even if then they were a little bloodshot. They were a striking grayish lavender. "Allison," I whispered, "we've got to get your suit off. You can't sleep in this." A lazy smile played across her lips. "Okay, Dr. Grove," she said dreamily. "Anything you say." Of course, if I had thought about it, I would have left her suit alone. So what if she happened to vomit and had to pay a shit ton to get it cleaned? She was one of the wealthiest teenagers on earth and could easily afford it. Hell, she could just buy another. But while I was wearing the kind of suit that you wore over your street clothes, she was wearing the kind that fit like a second skin. Her suit was lighter and offered better protection, as well as showcased her lovely curves. But I'd consider myself lucky if she had a G-string on underneath. An awkward situation, to say the least. "Damn you, Allison Flowers," I grumbled as I helped her maneuver the first of many zippers. "You are going to be the death of me." "No, I'm not," she intoned in a raspy whisper. "One day I'm going to save your life." We got the suit off without too much difficulty. Fortunately, she was wearing an undershirt with a modest pair of briefs, so I was saved from gazing upon her full womanhood. I gave her a couple aspirin and a glass of water, turned down the bed, and tucked her in. She was off to dreamland less than a minute later. I did see enough of her body to notice she was inked up like a sailor. There was a huge tattoo of an earthen-colored flower against an ink-blue background on her back, An angry black cobra wound around her left leg, and several tiny occult symbols on her upper arms. Now I knew the reason for the overly modest dress at the dinner party. Above Allison's bed was a framed pen and ink male nude. I noticed the model had the same menacing cobra tattoo wound around one of his finely muscled thighs. I squinted to see who the artist was and discovered it was one of hers. Damn, Lillian was right. She was brilliant. She was one of those rare artists who drew deep into the essence of their subjects. I wondered who the model was. Allison had definitely loved him. I took off my hazsuit, folded it neatly, draped it over a chair, and crashed on her sofa. Being a big brother sure could wear a person out. I awoke to the smells of a Southern-style breakfast cooking. At almost 9 at night, Allison was puttering around in her kitchen looking fresh-faced and lovely, fully recovered from the night before. "How you doing, Dr. Grove?" she asked when she saw me standing in the doorway. "It was sweet of you to stay over. I'm sorry if I was too much trouble. I'm a little worse for wear, but I guess I'll make it. Might I interest you in some breakfast?" It didn't look like I had much of a choice. The table was already set, plus the food smelled good and my stomach was talking. "Sure," I said, smiling. "Don't mind if I do." It was a veritable feast. Eggs, grits, sausage, and pancakes. Not exactly the best thing for that time of night or my waistline, but precisely what I needed at that moment. When we had finished eating and I was nursing my 4th cup of coffee along with a killer hangover, I asked her about the man in the drawing. "Who is he, Allison? An old boyfriend? He's certainly one fine specimen of manhood." She blushed and got a faraway, mournful look in her eyes. "He wasn't a boyfriend, really," she said sadly. "He and I just had a fling a couple of summers ago. His name was Ernesto Storm." Did he die?" "I don't know. I haven't seen him in a while. If he's alive, I don't think he's in region anymore. I know he no longer works at the 9th Zone Hospital. I checked. Want to tell me what happened?" "Well," she began, "at the same time I was seeing Ernesto, I was dating Charlie Nance, this nice Domer boy and son of a fellow board member who told me he had all his shots. I wound up getting pregnant by Charlie, which was bad enough, but then my father refused to believe the baby was Charlie's, because you know it had to be the dirty outsider dog who knocked me up. So my father hired some thugs to beat the crap out of Ernesto to teach him a lesson." "And you think those men killed him?" She shrugged. "Maybe. Dad was pretty pissed. As far as he was concerned, Ernesto had fucked with my honor. But what he didn't realize is that Ernesto had more honor than 1,000 Charlie Nances combined. And you want to know the really ironic thing about all this?" I took a sip of coffee only to find it had gone cold. "What?" "I fucked Ernesto to save his life and may have wound up getting him killed instead." I was confused. Something wasn't making sense. "Wait a minute. How exactly do you fuck someone to save their life? I mean, I've heard of a mercy fuck, but I have a gift, Dr. Grove. Somehow I can make viruses and crap listen to me. I tell them to leave a person alone and they do." Allison's response to my question was an example of the one thing I found most jarring since moving to the Crescent. Folks who lived there spoke about psychic abilities, hauntings, and other phenomena beyond the veil as if they were natural facts. It's not like there weren't odd things going on in the rest of the shattered states, indeed throughout the rest of the world. But in all the places I'd lived before, people had been more discreet about discussing them. "Why did Ernesto's life need saving?" I finally asked, hoping I sounded respectful and concerned instead of sarcastic. "He had a stage 2 environmental cancer," Allison explained. "I sensed it from the moment I glimpsed him in the cafe. He probably explained away the fatigue and steady weight loss by all the hours he was working at the hospital, being the macho man he was. I tried to draw it out of him," she continued, "but the illness was already too deep. I had to sleep with him." "Why save him in particular?" I asked. Allison rolled her eyes as if the answer should have been obvious. "You saw the drawing, Dr. Grove. Someone that beautiful should not have to die before their time. So let me get this straight. You saved his life because you thought he was hot?" Well, that was definitely an angle she hadn't considered before. "Partially," she reluctantly admitted, somewhat embarrassed by the realization her motives weren't as pure and noble as she once thought. "But he was also kind and warm. I still miss him almost 2 years later, which is a hell of a lot more than I can say for Charlie Nance." "Lillian says you recently lost your father," I said. "Yeah," she confirmed. "I think I sort of killed him." I laughed uneasily. She had to be kidding, right? How do you figure that? I have the kind of gift that cuts both ways, Allison explained. Yeah, I can put viruses and stuff to sleep, but I can also wake them up. I didn't mean to kill him. It's just that when I found out what he'd done to Ernesto, I got so angry. It was the kind of anger that keeps you awake at night, that freezes your heart to stone. As soon as I realized what I had done, I tried to undo it. I really did. But at that point, my feelings of ill will were more powerful than my feelings of love. And I did love my father, Dr. Grove. We fought all the time, but at least we kept each other on our toes. I miss him. Her eyes welled up with tears, which surprised me since all the time we'd been together she'd been playing the tough and worldly woman who was fazed by nothing. But I think her tears surprised her even more. God, Dr. Grove, she said between sniffles, you're the first person I've ever told that. Normally I would have told Mother Magdalene, but she got promoted and reassigned out of region. Who's Mother Magdalene? I asked. She's the new Catholic priest who used to run the Crescent food pantries and the homeless shelters. Was she the one who told you your gift cut both ways? Yeah, Allison replied, wiping away some stray tears on the back of her hand. She was a real smart lady, had the sight like nobody's business. She used to call me Firefly, said I was beautiful, but I'd burn out fast. It doesn't have to be that way, I said gently. There are an infinite number of timelines. No one can sense them all. Allison disagreed. No, that's my fate, because when Mother Magdalene said that, it felt true. Silence. By then it was close to midnight. Again. I needed to get home. I stood and started to gather up the dishes. Oh no, Allison said, I'll get those. Nonsense, I told her. You fixed me breakfast, it's the least I can do. I also kept you out way past your bedtime, she said, winking. We finished the dishes together, and afterwards Allison let me see more of her work, which was amazing. I don't pretend to understand art, but there was no need to strain yourself to understand hers because it reached out and grabbed you. It was a pity she couldn't study with someone, but the rules of her trust fund stipulated that she had to study something practical to keep the money, so she was majoring in transnational economics in school. She hated it, but she had to eat. Just before I left, Allison told me a little bit more about the drawing in her bedroom. I drew it from a photograph, something I almost never do. I shot the picture with my phone on the last night Nesto and I were together. I treated him to a hotel stay in the first zone since that was the only zone we hadn't, well, you know, in. Nesto was beautiful all the time, but he was especially beautiful when he was sleeping because he looked so peaceful and innocent. I mean, most of us look peaceful when we sleep, but the difference between his sleeping and waking face was profound. He was from the upper ninth, and he had this tough dude game face on all the time. In fact, when I first saw him in the cafe, I thought he was a soldier, maybe one of those black ops guys. But in the world of our hotel room, he dropped that mask for a while. That's the way I want to remember him. You know, I mused, I've noticed you've got a game face too. Tell you what, Allison Flowers, you drop your terrible twos femme fatale act around me and be the woman who draws these pictures and I'll be your friend for life. I extended my hand. Deal? We shook on it. Deal, she repeated. Then she wrapped her arms around me and planted a big juicy one on my lips. The kiss was plenty deep, but seemed more tender than lascivious, and strangely pleasurable. To my surprise, I found myself kissing back, but I soon came to my senses and pushed her away. What was wrong with her? Hadn't she heard a word of what I'd said? What the hell did you do that for? I demanded. She just grinned. Because you're a thirst trap, and because I don't want you to be sick for your wedding day. You were on the edge of catching a nasty cold. I just shook my head. I didn't know whether she was giving me a load of crap or what. You know, you're the first woman to kiss me since I was like 12. She threw up her hands, feigning innocence. Sorry, I just couldn't help myself. And I was telling the truth about the cold. Seriously, though. Congratulations, Dr. Grove. I think you'll make Uncle Lily very happy. 5 years later, Allison Flowers made good on her threat to save my life, and she did it in such a way that even I had to believe it. Not long after we were wed, Lillian offered me a position at Ruby Biotech. Specifically, he put me in charge of the human trials of the HIV omnibus vaccine his company was developing. By the time I joined the team, the trials had been running for almost 7 years, which I found amazing, because there was almost nothing in the literature about them. I mean, I knew Ruby Biotech was working on a vaccine, Uncle Prentice had people hard at work on one too, but I didn't know they were that close to success. Human clinical trials? Unbelievable. Part of my responsibilities was to help conduct the semi-annual follow-up interviews of our test subjects around the world, something that some team members jokingly referred to as doing the red light tour, since many of our study participants were sex workers. I flew to Beijing to conduct a few interviews and inspect operations, making sure our local affiliates were maintaining Ruby Biotech's strict scientific and ethical standards. Lillian had assisted with the last round of interviews there, and he'd made quite an impression. Anyone he interviewed fell in love with him. I was doing an interview with an androgynous young hustler who called himself Red Lotus, and Lillian was all he could talk about. "He's a very sweet man," he said. "He's obviously very important, yet he cares for people like me." I made some non-committal grunt in response. Red Lotus continued with his litany of praise. "He speaks my language very well, even knows some naughty words, but I like to hear him speak English." "Why?" I asked. "I like to practice my English, for one, but he also speaks English with a strange, how you say, music?" I chuckled. "That's his southern accent. He's trying to get rid of it." Red Lotus was scandalized. "Oh no," he protested. "Bad idea. It makes him special, and very cute." By the time I finished with my portion of the interviews, I was feeling elated, lonely, and very horny. I was elated because the vaccine was actually working, lonely because all that talk of Lillian made me homesick for him, and horny because many of my interviewees were flirting with me. I don't think they meant anything by it. Flirting was a job skill they constantly had to hone, but I still had to contend with the effect. My nightly video chat with Lillian didn't help matters any. It was certainly good to see his face and hear his voice, but his body was several thousand miles away in some small town in southern Brazil, and it would be almost a month before I got to hold him again. So I wound up doing something I rarely did. I suited up and slipped into the Beijing outer zones looking for a quickie. Mostly, I stayed faithful to Lillian, which frankly surprised the hell out of me since I'd been such a playboy in my youth. Lillian didn't demand absolute monogamy. Business often kept him away, and he realized I might get lonely. All he required was that I keep him first in my heart, which was as easy as breathing, since Lillian was the only man I ever truly loved. I found a hopping club, not too far from the Beijing Dome. It was a tourist trap, as evidenced by the ethnic diversity of the crowd and the wide variety of languages I heard spoken there. Plus, they were playing Western-style hard trance, that grating electronic dance music that always made me feel like I'd stuck my head inside a meat grinder. Allison positively loved that shit. I never got the point of it myself. I saddled up to the bar, ordered a drink, and was immediately approached by a tall, fashionably thin, and quite stunning transgendered person dressed in a silver body-hugging has-suit. She, since she was more feminine than masculine, took a joint out of her breast pocket and offered it to me. "No thanks," I said in Mandarin. I wasn't really sure which language to use, but decided that speaking the native language was safest. "Are you American?" my would-be companion asked in heavily accented English. "Why, is my accent that bad?" "No," she replied, chuckling. "You speak my language very well, better than I speak yours. What region are you from?" "I grew up in Upper Midwest, but now I've settled in Crescent region." "Ah, the Crescent," she said, smiling with recognition. Then she called it something in Mandarin, which roughly translated into land of restless ghosts. "What's your name?" I asked. "Mei-Ling, what's yours?" "David." "Like that guy who kills giants with slingshots." I smiled. "Yeah, like that guy. I should let you know that I'm not an all-the-way woman. I'm in between." I glanced at the slight bulge at her crotch. "I can see that. That doesn't bother you?" "No, it doesn't. There are many in America who wouldn't consider me an all-the-way man." "Why, you in between too?" "Nah, just gay." Mei-Ling wanted to dance. I told her I didn't know how to dance to the crap they were playing. She giggled and switched back to Mandarin. "It's very simple, David. Think of it as a fabric of rhythm. Pick a thread and stick to it. You hear that slow, deep bass that rumbles beneath your feet? Let's pick that thread. That way I can hold you close." She dragged me onto the floor before I could protest and held me so tightly that for an instant, I could barely breathe. Then she ground her hips against mine and we did a slow jam while the rest of the dancers frantically leapt about like cats in hot grease. It wasn't long before we both were hard. "Come," Mei-Ling said in a husky whisper. "I know a place where we can go." She took me to a hotel. We negotiated her fee. and then went at it with the shamelessness of strangers. She left before morning. I woke up feeling woozy. I chalked it up to the drinks and lack of sleep. But the feeling persisted through the rest of my travels and continued after I arrived home. Per standard procedure, I went to the company medical office for blood tests and a debrief. The next day, I received an urgent email asking me to return. "What's up?" I asked the doctor on duty. "It appears you've been poisoned, Mr. Grove." I had been standing, but after he dropped that bomb, I immediately pulled up a chair and took a seat. "What do you mean I've been poisoned?" "Specifically," the doctor explained, "you've been infected." "With what?" Suddenly, he would not look me in the eye. He gulped and focused his gaze somewhere above my head. "A weaponized mutation of HIV. I put my head in my hands. "Which strain?" I groaned. "HIV-R10. "Mailing," I said under my breath. "What?" the doctor asked, raising an eyebrow. I lifted my head. "What can I do?" I asked. Of course, I already knew the answer to that question. Not much of anything. When it occurred naturally, HIV-R10 was especially virulent and drug-resistant. The weaponized version was probably 1,000 times worse. "We can start you on a course of retrovirals," the doctor replied, straining to sound upbeat. "Ruby Biotech has several which have proven effective against HIV-R10, but the side effects can sometimes be debilitating." "You don't sound particularly hopeful," I observed. "No," the doctor admitted. "I am not. Whoever grew this stuff tweaked it to make it much harder to fight." A stray tear fell onto my sleeve. Up until then, I hadn't realized I was crying. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand, aware that someday not too far off even my tears might be laced with poison. That's how bad HIV-R10 was. Eventually, it got into everything. "Okay, Doc," I finally sighed. "I'll take the drugs. Just do me one favor." "And what's that?" "Please don't tell Dr. Ruby." "But I must," the doctor objected. "It's company policy. Besides, he really likes you. He would want to know." I banged my fist on his desk, causing him to jump. "Screw company policy. I want to tell Lillian myself." That evening, Lillian and I had our nightly video chat, but I couldn't bring myself to break the news. Still, he sensed something was troubling me. "It's something we should discuss when we're together," I told him. Then I asked, "When are you coming home?" My voice sounded pleading and desperate. "Soon, David, soon," he replied consolingly. "In about a week and a half. Please, love, tell me what's wrong." I shook my head, smiled weakly, and tried to make light. "It's probably nothing. I'm just being a drama queen." The next evening, I paid a visit to Allison, who looked both happy to see me and somewhat miffed that I hadn't seen fit to drop her so much as an email upon my return to Region. Still, she threw her arms around me and hugged me hard enough to nearly crush my ribs. And that's when she sensed the reason for my visit without me saying a word. "David," she announced, "you are crazy ill." "You can feel it?" "Hell yeah," she replied. She gave me another rib-crushing hug and kept me close. "Breathe with me," she commanded. "Let me read you." I tried to sync my breath with hers. At first it was difficult since I was a bundle of nerves, but eventually we were breathing together. "Man," she said, "that's one angry bug roiling your blood. It means to kill you. Do you know what it is?" "A weaponized version of HIV-R10. "Jesus H. Christ," she swore. "Who the hell gave you that?" My guess is it was this very sexy escort from the Beijing outer zones. Allison pulled away from me, put her hands on her hips, and smiled mischievously. "Damn, Mr. David," she said. "You really believe in living dangerously." I laughed, despite myself. That's another reason I had shown up on her doorstep. Allison could always make me laugh no matter how awful I felt. "Well, she was very beautiful," I said sheepishly. "And apparently meaner than a scorpion," Allison added. She led me to her living room and poured me a glass of brandy. "Sit. Tell me what happened." We sat together on her sofa, and I told her the whole sordid tale, such as it was. She was pensive at first. She closed her eyes, mulled over my story, and didn't say a word for several minutes. Then, she punched me in the arm. Hard. "Ow, what was that for?" "David, I swear, sometimes I think you grew up under a rock. Don't you know that if you're in a touristy club in a foreign country and someone slinks up to you and specifically asks if you're American, they probably don't have your best interests at heart? I've never had any problem with that before. That's when you were younger and looked upon as innocent. Now you're old enough to realize you're a baron and what that means, so some people figure you're also old enough to be punished for your sins by any means possible. The Beijing outer zones are some of the most toxic places on Earth, Allison went on to explain, and the resistance there is as brutal as the environment. Now, you might say it's China's own fault the Beijing outer zones are as toxic as they are. After all, it sold its soul down the river to be the sweatshop to the world. But we were some of the people who encouraged them to do it. We made it worth it to them. And so we must bear some of the blame. 99% of what we barons have is made from other people's suffering, and those people can only be kept down so long before they snap. I just stared at her. How dare she sympathize with such a fiend? Mei Ling was a fucking bioterrorist, not a freedom fighter. I hated when Allison got on her high horse and started talking politics. She was both pompous and frightening. You're not defending what this Mei Ling may have done, are you? Because there's nothing noble or just about murder in my book, especially when it involves me. I do not deserve this. She reached over and tenderly stroked my cheek. No, she agreed. You don't. And then she kissed me, slow, deep, and long. I didn't resist. I kissed her back. Soon we were in her bedroom, making furious love as if our lives depended on it. And I had the distinct feeling mine did. It was strange. I'd never really slept with a woman before, but by some miracle I knew exactly what to do. With Allison, everything felt as natural as breathing. By the time we were finished, as dawn was breaking, I was feeling light and airy, while Allison looked spent and feverish. That's when I realized the enormity of what she'd done. She'd stretched her gift to the limit for me. Allison, I solemnly whispered, thank you. Are you going to be okay? It took her a while to answer. She looked horrible. Her face was covered with red splotches. Her lips were pale and cracked, and she couldn't seem to catch her breath. I think so, she wheezed. This one was hard. Whoever grew that virus had a heart blacker than coal. Then she closed her eyes and faded from consciousness. A full 2 days passed before she awoke. I returned to Ruby Biotech's medical office 3 days before Lillian was due home. The same doctor who gave me my test results was on duty and agreed to see me right away. Good afternoon, Mr. Grove, he said when we got into his office. Have you decided upon a course of treatment? I said, I want to rerun the tests. He looked both confused and perturbed. I assure you the test results I gave you were accurate. I followed standard company protocol. I would not give you such bad news without being absolutely sure. Humor me. So he swallowed his pride and did. He took more blood samples and reran the tests. I had the new results by late that evening. The infection had vanished. He was absolutely flabbergasted. I don't understand. I squeezed his shoulder reassuringly. Don't sweat it, I said, smiling. I'm not quite sure what happened either. Lillian finally came home and I welcomed him with a home-cooked meal in my open arms. Later, as we lay in bed, he asked me, David, wasn't there something you meant to tell me? At first I panicked. I thought maybe the company doctor had informed him of my test results against my wishes, but then I realized Lillian was still in the dark. I had a little scare when I got back from Beijing, I finally replied. I feared I had contracted something serious. But you're okay now? Yes, I am, I told him. Turns out it was only a false alarm. I was just making a big deal about nothing.
Professional audiobooks in a click. Spoken.